Perfect. We are live. So I hope I'm audible to all of you guys. And today's session, we will be covering YAML. And YAML is a very important concept in terms of understanding how the DevOps infrastructure works and the ecosystem works. So YAML plays a very big role in the upcoming sessions as well. So when you learn more about Docker and Kubernetes, you'll understand that in every configuration that you make, you'll be working around with YAML files. So yeah, this is a very important session from the boss point of view and from a point of view where you're trying to learn more about Docker and Kubernetes. So without any further ado, let's begin. And I'll be sharing my screen. Um, just give me a minute. Okay. Cool. So I'll just share my screen and then we're good to go. Just let me connect my tab. Okay. Yes. Cool. So I hope my screen is visible to all of you. And yep. So let's begin with the presentation. And just set up this screen and yep, good to go. Cool. So yep, in this session we will be again covering, as I already mentioned, we'll cover YAML from scratch, right? And let's try to understand what YAML is, and then let's dive into how we can write YAML files for our Kubernetes manifests or Docker containers, right? So yeah, good to go. So again, when you talk about YAML files, right, the major constraint. Let me check if I'm audible to all of you once. Verifying everything. Yes. Okay. Cool. Um, yep. So when you talk about YAML files, right, the first thing that should come in our mind is what is an YAML file, right? So YAML stands for the when you try to understand the term of YAML, it means nothing but it says YAML ain't a markup language, right? Now it says YAML ain't a markup language. Now, what you must be having a question about why does it why we have a naming convention like this, where in HTML we know it's hypertext markup language, XML is an extensible markup language. When we talk about YAML, we call it YAML ain't a markup language. So again, to understand this, let's dive a bit more into it. So initially, it was known as YAML was previously known as this, right? That it was known as yet another markup language. Cool. Now, with the course of time, people tried to, initially people tried to relate YAML with respect to markup languages and everything, but then we realized that no, YAML, the perspective of understanding YAML is very different than what we have in, sort of other hypertext markup languages, right? And what is a markup language? That's a very important question that we should have in our mind, right? So, markup languages, if I have to understand, let's understand markup languages at first. Now, what is a markup language? Now, markup languages, they deal with nothing but they deal with understanding documents or writing something which is related to documents, right? Now, YAML does not deal with only documents. So, yeah, a documentation is just a part of YAML, but we also have something more than that. So, we have documents, we have commands, and overall, if I have to give a unanimous name to this, we call them working around with objects. Okay, so that's a basic difference between YAML and other markup languages. Now, there must be a query that there are other languages as well. Why do we need YAML? So there are a few languages, or you can call it that we have JSON, we have XML, which does similar work as YAML. But then YAML's efficiency and the way of it has been written, it helps a lot in terms of writing less number of code and making it simplified, making it easier for anyone to understand as well, right? So the only thing that you have to remember at the first place is that when we talk about YAML, it does not have functionality. So you can't expect any YAML file to be functional, right? Yet the best feature of YAML is that it can be shared across any environment, right? Now, if I have to again jump into the basics of why we require this and why we require an YAML file, to be honest, right? So there are two topics which you have to understand here. First one is the topic is known as serialization and deserialization. Now, what is this? Now, let's take an example where you have an object, right? So, what is an object? You can learn more about objects if you have learned about object-oriented programming. So, let's take it as this consideration as an object is something which defines some functions and some variables together to implement them, right? So, let's say we have some variables and we also have some functions, and we want to implement them together. So, in this case, the thing that we will use is an object, right? So in C++ language, we have a class, and then to implement this class, we use a class object, something similar to that. Okay. Now, yep. So again, if I have to again justify what serialization and what deserialization is, it's related to something manipulating with around with objects itself. Okay. So let's take an example here. So let's say we have an object. Now this object has been written in a particular operating system, right? So let's say there is an operating system one. Now I want to use this object across multiple distributed systems, or like a multiple operating system, multiple environments. How can I do that? So I will convert this object into a shareable format, right? And I'll basically, what I'll do is I'll try to hold up this all this object data into something. Let's say a group or a box, right? In this box we have all the data which the object consists of, and then we try to use this into our, and we can basically take a single form, right? So we have a single form of data which can be interpreted by everyone. All right. So that's this entire process of converting a single object into a single form of object which can be interpreted by everyone in every operating environment is known as serialization. And completely, of course, the reverse of this, if you're trying to interpret back to object, it's known as deserialization. Now while sort of let's say you have written a particular document, right? You have had some data here. Now you want to have this data to be used in multiple places. Let's say you want to have it used in a machine learning project, also a web project. How can you have both the environments to work, like this data to work around with both the environments, right? So the process is nothing but serialization. Cool. Now, for this process to happen, for serialization to happen, we require something, a format basically, which is known as or like a particular language, which in our case is going to be YAML. So YAML is the language which will help us to sustain serialization or to implement serialization. But we can also use JSON, we can also use XML. They have all their own use case pros and cons, but in our case we use YAML. So YAML is widely adopted. Now there are a lot many benefits of YAML as well, so we'll try to understand that from very basics. But again, we can also use JSON and XML, right? Cool. So let's first of all deep dive into understanding the benefits of YAML first of all, right? So let's say benefits of YAML. The first benefit of YAML is that it not only works around with documents, but commands, dependencies, etc., etc. So a lot many features, right? Secondly, the syntax of YAML is very easy, and the validation of that syntax is also very easy, right? The third benefit is that the community of YAML is very large. So you can have, if you come across any particular error or a problem, you can easily sort of run through that error with respect to the community support that you have. You can just go and put it, your question somewhere, and there are so many people to help you out, to help to just understand how this works, right? What else we have? Something, let's say, YAML supports multiple environments, right? So any environment, basically, whether it's a cloud or a local system environment, YAML supports that. So overall, these are the few major benefits of why we work around with YAML files. And right, so again, if I have to again summarize the entire thing, so if you understand, we had initially YAML coming up, and then what is YAML, the difference between YAML and JSON and XML, right? That's the topic of serialization and deserialization. So of course, to use an object, we use a serialization technique for which we have YAML files. So basically, serialization is nothing where we try to use an object data for into multiple across environments. And of course, our opposite is in this deserialization, which we can also implement using YAML files. Now, where do we actually use YAML files in DevOps, right? So let's understand the use case of YAML in DevOps. So the use case of YAML in DevOps. So in DevOps, to be very specific, we use YAML in Kubernetes. So there are something known as manifests in Kubernetes. There is something known as config files. So all these are written in YAML files. We use it in Docker as well. So Docker configs are also written in YAML files, right? So overall in DevOps, every time we are trying to share data, right? So sharing of data in DevOps deals directly with YAML files. Cool. So yep, that is all about YAML files, and we'll also try to understand the structure of different YAML files in some time. But let me, get back to where we started. And okay, so I see a lot of queries here. Let me take them one by one. The full form of YAML, as I said, YAML ain't a markup language, right? So what is the difference between serialization and deserialization? I already shared that. Phoenix, I hope you have understood that. How to create YAML files. So we'll see how to create YAML files. Does Ansible uses YAML or JSON file? Ansible uses YAML and JSON both, but yes, YAML is something that Ansible prefers more. Right. So basically, it's something like this, right? You can use any type of file, right? Okay, you can use JSON as well, you can use XML as well, but we try to use XML or we try to use YAML because the use case of YAML supports more to DevOps ecosystem and infrastructure. Cool. So no, YAML and JSON are different. Okay, so YAML has its own use case, JSON has its own use case. We'll try to understand them in just some time. Cool. So let me share my screen once again, and let me just share my screen once again, and then we'll try to understand what YAML files exactly are. So let me share my VS Code link. Just give me a minute. Cool. I hope my screen is visible to all of you. Let me jump into my VS Code. So yep, this is my VS Code file, right? And now we'll try to understand, how YAML works, right? So let's start with an example. Just give me a minute. So let's first try to understand the different data types that we have in YAML, right? So let's give it a name of data types dot YAML. Now again, YAML files you can have multiple extensions. So you can also write dot YAML, YAML or YML. So both of them simplifies that it is a YAML file. So let me save this. Let's take a new folder. Say DevOps Bootcamp. And perfect. So what are the different objects that we have, right? So in YAML, the syntax goes like this, right? So let's say I have to, so basically, I hope you have already worked around with key value pairs like dictionaries in Python. So YAML mostly works around with key value pairs itself, right? So let's say if I have to give a key value pair, let's say I have to define a data. So let's say myself colon and then the value. So let's say Dhruva Jyoti, right? Then what's my role? So my role is DevOps engineer, right? Which company do I work for? So I work for a company known as Commudle, let's say, right? And so all these, see, if you directly understand this, right? We are defining keys, and this is a value. This is a key, and this is a value, right? But how can we define data types in YAML? So this is a very important question. So let's say we're trying to define string data type. So right now, if you see myself, Jyoti, right, it's automatically YAML will understand that this is a string. But there are two other ways of defining strings as well, which is under single quotes and under double quotes. So all three of them, they mean the same. Okay. So this is where we can define string variables in YAML. Now let's try to understand. Let's say if you have to write a bio, I have to share a multiple line thing, right? So let's say I'm writing a bio, and bios are mostly 2-3 lines, or in LinkedIn we write a bio which is around 4-7 lines long. So how can I define that? So all I have to do here is that give a straight line, and then the most important part of YAML is the indentation, right? So right now I have to give a space and then write whatever I have to write. So hey, my name is Dhruva Jyoti. I'm a DevOps enthusiast, right? So if you see here, we automatically is maintaining the indentation. So in the, now again, YAML is a in the, it's very case sensitive to case, like of course. And so let's say if I have to write here Dhruva Jyoti and I write here you as Dhruva Jyoti, both of them are different. Okay. So in YAML, it's case sensitive as well as it is very much specific to indentations. If you do not follow the indentation, it will give you an error. Cool. Now let's say I want to write a single, like I want to write single line but in multiple lines, right? So I have to give a message or something like that. So how can I do that? So let's say message, and then I'll pass a less than symbol, and again maintain the indentation. So let's say this will all be in uh, so this is my extension doing the work. Okay, this will all be in one line. Cool. So again, we'll validate these YAML files as well in some time. So let's just try to understand all of them at once. So if I have to write this in some other way, right? How can I write it? Let's say I have to define that, okay, message is going to be a string type, and I have to define it. So for that we use this. There is exclamation mark, right? And then define it as string. And then let's say I'll copy all of it. So this will all be in one line. Right. So give a comment here. This is same as this. Cool. Let's give it some other name. Let's say. Okay. Amazing. So let's try to understand more on this one. So let's say if I have to define a number, how can I define that? So let's say a number, and let's say 5473. Let's say marks. I give it a float value. Let's say 98.76. Let's say if I have to give a Boolean value now. So this is going to be a Boolean value for us. And Boolean value, you can define it something as bool, right? And then give it say no, or you can also use something like this. So you can also call it small n, capital N. You can call it as false or false. Both of them are different, as I already mentioned. It's a case sensitive. Or you can also write it as this, like false, right? Now the same applies for true as well. Okay, so you can experiment around with it. So for now, let's just keep it n, right? Perfect. Now let's say if I have to define a specific type of integer. Okay, so there are multiple types of values. So if I have to define a type, so let's say 0. So I want to define that, okay, 0 variable will always store a 0 file, right? So I'll just say 0 integer 0, right? So this is like a unique element now. If I have to define a positive element, so let's say positive element, and let's give it a name of integer type, and let's call it 45. So this is how you can define direct, specifying the type directly from your directly YAML files. So this is how we also work around with configuration files. I'll show you some configuration files in Scratch in some time, right? So let's see if you have to define a null value. How can you do that, right? So you can also do that using this. Let's say surname, and you have to define the null. So the null type is also available here, so I'll say null null. Right now you can play around with this kind of other data types as well. Now there is also, I think, you can also define date, like date, and then you call it timestamp if I'm correct. Let me check if it works. And then you have to give it a format in terms of, let's say, 2022 11, today's date is 15. Right, so this is how you define date. You can also define times and like Indian time zone, UTC, and everything. Okay, so that's how you work around with data types in YAML. Right, this is just a very simple example. You can play around more, but let me just jump into code bases once and let me show you how all of this works. So I'm in my GitHub repository right now. So let me jump. Let me just go for something. Let's say convert YAML to JSON. So this is how where we will compare how our YAML files represent in terms of JSON and if they are validated, right? So let us copy paste the code that we just wrote. So let's copy this and let's paste it here. Uh, So if you see here, the same data type, like this is a YAML file, right? And this is a myself, same. So you just use curly braces here. But again, in JSON, you define all it under strings, right? Because it automatically identified as a string. Now let's try some more, whatever we have written. So let's try for this message. Let's copy paste it in here. So this is how it will look like in a JSON format, right? So why we choose YAML files, of course you understand, right? So if when you are trying to do nested operations or something like that, it will get difficult for you after a point of time to work around with nested operations, right? So again, there is another important data type like this. We talk about the basic data, but there are also advanced data types. So let's say there is something known as sequence in YAML. So let's try to understand that. So let's say student. I've defined it as student, right? Let me zoom in a bit, and then we will compare it with the JSON file, right? Cool. So student, and then we have define it as sequence. Okay, so we call it sequence, and then use indentation and say marks. We use it, let's say name, and then let's call it uh, roll number, right? This is a sequence for us, right? So let's say if I have to see how it looks like in JSON, this is how it looks like. So JSON, it will take it as an array, right? Student array, which holds marks, roll number, and name, right? So you can also define the same like this. Okay, so let's take an example. Let's take an example of cities, right? So let's call it cities, and say New Delhi, and let's call it Mumbai. This is how it looks like. So you can define it either as a sequence or directly like this, right? Now you can also define something known as sparse sequence. Okay, so this is known as sparse sequence. What is that? So basically you can have null values here. So let's call it hey, hi, and then we don't give anything. We call, let's give it null value, and let's say sub, right? So if you see here, this is a sparse sequence. It automatically identifies this as null, and you can easily convert into JSON. But of course, you already see the difference in the syntax, and why we use YAML files is because of the easier management. Okay, so there is also another key value pairs data type in YAML which you can use, which is known as map. So let's try to understand what maps are. So let's say we have a name. Let's give it a name. It's a Dhruva, and then we take another. So under the Dhruva, we have role, which is nothing but DevOps engineer, right? Um, cool. Yes, and then we decide that okay, we will have something known as age of for Dhruva. So age is, let's say, 78, and let's say job is a student, right? So again, if you see here, it already shows me a bad indentation of mapping entry here. So let me try to fix this. Uh, let me try writing it in this way, maybe. name, say Truba, and then say role, and then I give it the role as this. So age is 21, and job is engineer. This is how it will look like. Similar thing that we did. This is known as a map, right? So we can also have something known as paired. So you can pair things together. So you can have keys which are having duplicate values. So let's say pair example, and then defining as define it as pairs, right? And then let's say job, and let's say job is engineer, and then again we say job, which is also teacher. Right, so this is how you can define pairs. So same keys, job is the same key but has two different values, right? We can also use something known as set. Now set allows you to have unique values in YAML files. So let's try to understand that as well once. So let's say names is the variable that we are going to use, and let's define it as a set. And then we pass something known as a question mark, right? So we say question mark and say Dhruba. So Dhruba will have a unique value, right? And then we say Arpan. These are all unique values, okay? And let's say Saurav. So this is how we define unique values. And if you see your names, Dhruba is null, Arpan is null, Saurav is null. So these are all going to be unique values, right? Now there is also something known as OMAP, which used to copy the previous examples. So we will try to understand that in a very short example. So let me try replicating that as well for you. Now let's take variable say people and define it as OMAP, right? And let's say Dhruba, right? What's error? Okay, okay. So let me remove this. Yeah, works fine. So Dhruba, right? And in Dhruba, I'll define my name. So this is how we can write nested values. So the name is Dhruba Jyoti. The age is 21. Role is engineer, right? Done. So the next time I define another person, so let's say Arpan. And this is going to be unique for Arpan now, right? So the name is Arpan. Age, let's say 34. And role, let's say founder, right? So this is how you implement OMAPs, right? And you can also reuse these properties. But if you see the difference, right, in YAML, the syntax, how many lines? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and you see the difference in JSON already, right? So this is why we majorly use YAML files to work around with our, in and let's say when we try to understand, in DevOps, we're trying to majorly use YAML files. Now you can also validate these YAML files. So let's me copy this and try to validate YAML. So let's say validate YAML files. There are multiple tools available. I'll also write a blog. So YAML lint is an amazing tool. So let's just copy paste and say go valid YAML, right? So let's me try to check the indentation and then say go. Yeah. So let's see if this gives us go as well. So you see, so did not expect the key while passing a block mapping at line 2. So this is a valid indentation. So you can validate your YAML files as well. So let me show you a clear example of how this looks like. So let me go to a project. So this is a project from HashiCorp, right? And if you see here, there is a GitHub Actions files defined. Let me just jump into the GitHub Actions file. And move to workflows. And this you see, these are all YAML files, and these are all the workflows, the CI workflows for GitHub Actions, right? So if I just open one, you'll see. So all of them are maintaining, they have written some things, they're running some jobs here, some steps here, but of course they're all maintaining YAML syntax. So let me just copy paste them and check if this is a valid YAML once so that you can verify. So let me just copy paste this and say go. So the valid YAML, right? So this is how you can work around. So of course you don't have to understand this right now. We'll understand them in very briefly in the next video, upcoming sessions. But yep, we'll be running Docker next. So Docker, we are going to play around with YAML files a lot. In Kubernetes as well, we're going to play around with YAML files a lot. So yes, that is all about YAML files. You can learn more. There are lot many blogs and everything written are available. You can just sort of run through them. But I'll show you some tools which are very much helpful in terms of learning what's it YAML files. So let me reshare my screen and give you guys a good idea on that. Just give me a minute. Cool. So let's try to understand few tools that will help you a lot in terms of understanding how to work around with YAML files. So there is something known as KH lens. Okay. So this is a Kubernetes IDE, right? And so what KH Lens does is it automatically validates your YAML files, right? You can work around with different workloads. You can track down the CPU utilization directly from here in terms of pods. Right? In Kubernetes, we have something known as pods. You don't have to understand it right now, but you can understand it later on. And this is an amazing tool. The free version is also available, right, for the students to use. So feel free to jump in and check it out, right? So let me share this link with all of you guys as well. Um, And there's something another tool which is known as Monocle, which is an amazing tool as well. Now this basically makes your job pretty easier. How? Because in DevOps it says that you have to work around with YAML files, but these tools make it like you work in DevOps without having to work with around with YAML files. They does it sort of these kind of tools automatically sort of manages almost everything that you have to do with with YAML files, right? So again, with Monocle, you can easily take control of the configuration lifecycle, right? So basically, it will give you sample configuration files. So let's say if you're trying to run a config file, you're trying to build a configuration file, it will directly give you one to work around with, and this is an amazing thing as well, right? To have there are other tools as well. There is something known as dat tree. And if I have to show what Datry is, again, Datry, it sort of manages your automation policies, your, it saves a lot of time in terms of finding errors in your configuration files. It's again helps you in securing your infrastructure as well in development and as well as in production. And it gives you different configuration setups, right? So like if you are trying to if there is a memory leakage happening somewhere, right, or if there is something which is not fair or something which can harm your container in a longer run, it will automatically give you a warning. So again, it's an amazing tool. Feel free to check this out as well. Cool. So that is pretty much it about the YAML files, right? And again, thank you so much everyone for joining in. The next session will be on Docker, so feel free to join that session as well. And okay, let me just share this link as well. So let's say that three that I can check this out. We will share these links in the channel as well. And yep, works fine. So yep, thank you so much everyone for joining in this video. Let's catch up in the next session, which will be on Thursday. So yep, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining in. Also feel free to take some screenshots of this session, right? And like if you are participating in the DevOps with Commudle trend, and of course we're trying to build this from scratch. The entire DevOps community of Commudle to support us as much as possible. All the resources are completely free of cost, and we're just trying to help the community to learn DevOps more and crack some good opportunity in DevOps. So feel free to connect us in the Commudle channel of CDN, and happy to have a conversation in terms of different opportunities and everything. Also sharing all these resources completely free, of course, in the channel. So join this channel if you're not a part of it. Thank you again for joining in this video and this session. Let's catch up next session, which is on Thursday, which will be on Docker. And yeah, you need to RSVP your seat before you join the session, so make sure you do that as well. Thank you so much, guys, everyone. Thank you.